In this video, we are going to continue our moss giant enemy animation system, and we're going to set up our walk animation. So underneath our moss giant here, we have a moss giant walk, and we're going to go through a similar process that we just went through setting up the idle. It starts with slicing the sprite. So we're going to make sure our sprite mode is set to multiple, open up the sprite editor, and we're going to slice it grid by cell size, and it is a 512 by 512. When we slice this, we will now have individual 512 boxes around each. Hit apply, and that will update our sprites. You can also make the pixels per unit 512. This will just give the highest quality crisp image. So pixels per unit will be 512. Okay, and hit apply. Once that is finished, we can then create a new animation for walk. So with the moss giant sprite selected, we can create a new animation, and let's call this walk. And you'll save it in the animation folder that you created for the moss giant. Save that out, and we're good to go. Get into record mode, and let's drag our moss walk in animations. Select moss giant walk 0 through 15, and click and drag into the animation view. Once you've done that, set the sample rate to 15, get out of record mode, and you can go ahead and test out the animation inside the scene view. And you'll see here that this is our walk animation. So everything looks really good there. The next thing that we need to do is go into the animator component and set up the logic for when it should transition from walking to idle and vice versa. So to do that, we're going to select the character sprite, and we're going to double click the controller to bring up the animator view. By default, it's going to start in the idle page or the idle animation, and from there we can create a transition for when it should move to walk. So we can see how this transition is going to look, let's go ahead and just create an exit time animation to walk. After idle has finished, it's going to automatically transition to our walk animation. And our walk animation, when it finishes, will go ahead and move back to idle when it's told to do so. So when the game starts, it will play one whole animation of idle, and then it will naturally transition to our walk. We can set the duration time to be 0 for the fade, and then we do want it to have exit time so that the full idle animation will play. Then once we're in walk, when do we want to transition back to idle? Well, we'll tell it to transition back to idle in our game whenever we want it to. So I'm thinking the behavior that we're going to want is going to be, it's going to start here and it's going to walk towards the end, and then it's going to perform its idle, and then it's going to walk back towards the end over here. So basically it's going to stay walking until we tell it to stop. And the way we tell it to stop is through a waypoint system. So we'll have some waypoints that it's going to get to. When it gets to its destination, we say, hey, stop moving, go back to idle, and then automatically once it's finished with idle, it will begin to move to its next destination. So that's the system that we're going to create. So to test this out, what we can do here is we need to create an idle trigger. So we'll create a new trigger here called idle, and that's going to automatically trigger this animation whenever we call it. So when we are walking and we trigger idle, we're going to go ahead and use that. So if we're in the walking animation at any time, if we were to trigger idle, it will transition from walk to idle. The exit time is going to be none, and the duration for fading, the transition duration, is going to be 0. Let's save this. And let's hop back into Unity. If we run the game, we should see that we're going to do one frame or one animation cycle of idle, and then our character is going to begin walking. And there you go. And he will continue walking until we change this idle, until we trigger it. So if we made it to our destination and we trigger idle, he's going to go ahead and stop and then continue walking. That's our AI behavior. Also, we will not be using tilemap for the remaining portion of this course. We may end up creating a custom brush later on to paint some prefabs, but for the most part, we don't need this tile palette view up anymore. So I'm going to close it out. That way we have a bigger screen space to work with here. I'll see you guys in the next video.